The laughter died the second the old man set down his glass. Nicknamed the corporal smirked. The veteran didn't blink. Grim Reaper. A chair scraped. A beer went untouched. And somewhere in the back, a young Marine forgot to breathe. O'Malley sat on the edge of Highway 76 where base traffic thinned and the ocean smell pushed through the diesel. Friday nights, the place filled with Marines loud enough to rattle the glass trophies over the back bar dart leagues, charity runs, command softball from years nobody remembered until the music got sentimental. It was that kind of night. Boots up bills paid jokes, running a little hotter with each round. Eddie owned the joint and moved like a man born behind a counter, broad shoulders, clean towel, watchful eyes. He'd swapped the television from cable news to a Padres replay, not because anyone cared about the score, but because the sounds of bats and crowd noise made the laughter feel harmless. Down the rail from the register sat an old man in a weathered field jacket, white hair, trimmed neat, a bowl cap that simply read USMC. He wasn't frail exactly, just finished with hurrying. The wheelchair under him was military gray, scuffed along the footrests where life had been rougher. He wrapped his right hand around a glass of rye, like it was the first warm thing after a long cold march. "Top off, Jack," Eddie asked without looking like he was asking. Jack Carter lifted the glass, eyed the burn at the bottom. "Long life," he said, the words coming easy, no complaint in them. Eddie understood that answer and gave him a finger of rye and a quiet nod. At a high top by the jukebox, 6 young Marines were working through pictures with the dedication of men who planned to sleep until noon. They were fresh haircuts, still sharp laughter too fast. The tallest was a corporal with the kind of chin recruiting posters loved and the undercut barbers knew by name. He told stories with his hands slapping the table to sell the punchline. His buddies hooted like it was new material, and maybe for them it was. "Look at this," the corporal said finally, his voice cutting across the room. He jabbed his chin at Jack, who hadn't moved in 20 minutes. Grandpa made it to happy hour. A few chuckles. Nothing lethal. Eddie glanced over the way you watch a pot before it boils. Jack tasted the rye and kept his eyes on the TV. A man who had learned you could ride out most weather by keeping your anchor set. The corporal stood swagger meeting gravity halfway. He sauntered over, palms empty, smile not mean so much as curious, the way a young dog is curious about a fence it hasn't touched yet. "Evening, sir," he said, sing-song polite. "You misplace your license or just the legs." A breath drew in around the room, the kind of inhale you hear when a wave is about to break. A boot heel stopped tapping. Eddie's paw paused midstream. "It's fine," Jack said without looking up. His voice was low, steady, the sort you hear in a chapel the night after bad news. He set the glass on a bar napkin, squared it, then lifted his eyes to meet the boy's grin. "Son," he said, "the last man who spoke to me like that is buried in Arlington." The corporal's eyebrows flicked like he'd been slapped with a cold towel. Someone at the high top muttered, "Easy Carter," as if saying his surname might anchor him to common sense. The corporal kept the smile, but he took a half step back as if room had narrowed. "You a vet then?" he asked, trying to turn the moment casual again. "What did you do?" "Supply motor tea cook," once Jack said. Once the corporal echoed, feigning wonder. "Well, once upon a time, right?" "What was your call sign then, sir?" Silence isn't the absence of noise. It's the decision to stop making it. The bar made that decision. Even the Padres replay seemed to lower its voice. Jack's fingers went to the rim of the glass. He turned it a quarter inch, so the condensation ring lined up with a dark grain in the wood. When he spoke, there wasn't heat in it or pride. Just fact. "They called me Grim Reaper." Nobody laughed. A stool leg squeaked. Far off, the ice machine kicked once and fell quiet. From the high top, a sergeant with a faded scar running from ear to jaw set down his beer and stared. He was older than the rest by a handful of desert suns and too many funerals. Say again, he asked, not to Jack, but to the room that suddenly felt smaller. Jack didn't say it again. He didn't have to. The sergeant swallowed like something dry had gone sideways. "You messing?" he whispered to the corporal, who didn't answer because his mouth had forgotten how. Eddie leaned both hands on the wood. He'd been around long enough to keep a dozen secrets and pour them only when needed. "You boys ever hear about Sand Halo?" he asked softly. The sergeant nodded, one's eyes not leaving Jack. Recon team went dark. 7 days, nobody could raise them. When comms came back, there were 50 enemy down and 2 hostages drinking bottled water under an American flag someone had wired to a radio mast. He licked his lips. They said one man moved at night and the ground moved with him. The corporal tried for a scoff, found only breath. Stories, he said, but it sounded like he was trying to convince the floor. Old-timer ghost tales. Jack took another slow sip. His gaze drifted past the boy to the window where the neon open sign painted a red hum on wet glass. "Ghosts are just men folks decided not to remember," he said. So the sergeant asked, voice small now, "What unit?" Jack's eyes softened. Not friendly so much as merciful. "The kind that doesn't wear unit patches," he said. He set his glass down again, precise as inspection. "We all ate the same sand." The corporal's face drained a shade you only see on fresh paper. He looked for a laugh and found none. "So you're saying you're that guy," he said. "The Grim Reaper." "Used to be," Jack said. The jukebox clicked tracks and went quiet, like it too wanted to listen. Outside, a car hissed by on rain-wet asphalt. A woman at a corner table pulled her purse closer without knowing why. The room had shifted not to fear exactly, but to the reverence people reserve for church doors and folded flags. Eddie slid a coaster under Jack's glass like a man setting a medal. "On the house," he said. Jack shook his head. "I pay for what I drink." He turned to the corporal. "You wearing that uniform tomorrow?" "Yes, sir," the boy said automatically. "Then remember, people will let you be cruel if you make them laugh first. Don't take the easy applause." The corporal nodded, shame reddening him in blotches. "Yes, sir," he said again and meant it this time. The door opened, then air pushing damp and cold through the warm room. A tall figure in dress uniform stepped in, raindrops bright on polished shoes. He didn't scan the crowd. He already knew who he'd come for. "Evening, Colonel," Eddie said, because he knew everyone who mattered within 20 miles. The newcomer's eyes went to Jack. The lines around his mouth said he'd practiced this moment and still didn't like it. He lifted his chin, voice gravel low. "Reaper." Jack's hand paused halfway to the glass. "Sir," he replied. The corporal glanced from one to the other, the lesson still wet on his face. "What did we just walk into?" he whispered. Nobody answered. "You don't put names on storms until they pass." The colonel's voice carried the kind of weight that silences laughter, the way wind snuffs out a candle. "Reaper," he said again, not loud, but heavy enough to bend the room. Jack's fingers paused on the rim of his glass. "Didn't think you'd still be chasing ghosts, Davis." The younger Marines looked between them, confusion tightening their faces. Davis, Colonel Marcus Davis, wasn't the kind of man who walked into a bar after hours unless it mattered. His uniform was pressed to regulation medals, dull under the amber lights. He nodded once toward the bartender. "Evening, Eddie." Colonel Eddie answered. "Didn't know you two still." "We don't," Jack cut in quietly. That answer drew a small breath from Davis, the kind people take when they've been waiting years to say something and still don't know how. He moved closer. "It's been 20 years, Jack. You shouldn't be here." Jack smiled faintly, an old soldier's tired smirk. "Funny. I used to hear that every time I made it back from a mission." The colonel's jaw flexed. "This isn't a mission. It's survival. You're supposed to be dead." "Yeah," Jack said. Supposed to be. The corporal, unable to read the air, cleared his throat. Excuse me, sir. Sirs. What's going on? You two know each other. Davis turned his head slowly. His gaze could cut through arrogance like a bayonet. Son, do you have any idea who you're standing next to? Just a guy in a wheelchair, the corporal muttered, but there wasn't conviction in it anymore. Eddie wiped the bar with a towel that didn't need it. Colonel, he said softly, they're just kids. They don't know. Then maybe it's time they did. Davis looked back at Jack. You going to tell them, or do I? Jack leaned back slightly, the leather on his chair creaking. Go ahead, Marcus. You always liked telling stories more than living them. Davis took a slow breath. Operation Sand Halo, he began. Northern Iraq, 2003, recon unit of 12. Call sign Reaper Team. The sergeant with the scar lowered his eyes. My old CO mentioned them once. Said they were ghosts. Ghosts, Davis repeated. That's generous. What was left of them couldn't haunt a mirror. He looked at Jack again. He was the team leader. We'd lost radio contact for 7 days. Every recon bird that flew over came back with smoke on the horizon and nothing moving below. We'd written them off until we got a ping on a coded channel. One phrase, mission complete, 2 alive. The young Marines didn't move. Beer went flat. Jack's voice was calm. You make it sound like a story. It wasn't. Then tell it, Davis said quietly. Jack's gaze drifted to the far wall where the neon hum painted slow shadows. We were tracking a convoy carrying hostages. Intel said 12 enemy combatants. Turned out closer to 100. My men, they never broke. They held for 6 days, no food, no sleep. When the ammo ran dry, we went silent. When I came to, the sand was red and the air smelled like copper. He stopped letting the sentence sit until even the rain outside hesitated. One of the hostages, he continued, was a kid, Army Intel, maybe 19. He asked me what my name was. I didn't answer. He said I looked like death walking through fire. The next time command checked comms, the only name they heard was Grim Reaper. The corporal swallowed hard. The story didn't sound like the kind that came from drunks or old glory chasers. It sounded like a man remembering things he wished he couldn't. Davis nodded grimly. They found 50 enemy, down 2 hostages alive and no other Americans breathing. They wanted to debrief him. He refused. Then he disappeared before we could. File classified. KIA. Jack gave a dry chuckle. Classified's just Latin for bury the truth with the body. The colonel's stare hardened. You think you were the only one buried that day? Command erased the whole team, Jack. Even me. I spent 2 years writing reports nobody would sign. The sergeant leaned forward. So you're telling us the Reaper wasn't a myth? Jack met his eyes. Myth's just a memory that lived long enough to get lonely. The corporal whispered, You killed 50 men. Jack didn't answer right away. War kills 50 men, he said at last. I just carried the shovel. Silence spread like oil over water. The jukebox clicked but didn't play. Davis finally broke it. There's more, he said. The program that trained him, the Reaper Initiative, wasn't shut down. It went underground. And now someone up top has noticed the ghost they buried is sitting in a bar 2 miles from Pendleton. Jack's eyes stayed on his glass. They want me back. They want you gone, Davis said. You showing your face here wakes questions they don't want asked. The corporal looked around, lost. Why, he's a hero. Heroes, Davis said, make headlines. This one made paperwork. Jack smiled faintly. Guess I was never much for parades. Eddie spoke for the first time in minutes. Colonel, if they're still watching him after all these years, what are you doing here? Warning him, Davis said. He's not safe. None of us are if the Reaper file opens again. Jack's hand twitched, small but visible. Maybe it's time it did. Don't, Davis snapped. You think they'll let the truth out? They'll kill anyone connected to it. Jack finished his whiskey in one swallow, set the glass down slow and deliberate. Marcus, the truth isn't theirs to keep. I buried enough of it already. The colonel's shoulders sagged, age showing through the medals. You're not the Reaper anymore, Jack. Jack looked at him with something between pity and resolve. You ever stop being a Marine, Colonel? Outside, thunder rolled over the Pacific. The neon light flickered once, then steadied. Davis straightened his cap. They'll be coming soon. I know. What are you going to do? Jack's mouth curved, the closest thing to a smile he'd shown all night. Finish my drink, he said. Then I'll see if death still remembers my name. The colonel hesitated, then turned to go. For what it's worth, he said, pausing at the door, you were the best we ever had. Jack didn't look up. That's what scares them. The door shut. The storm outside grew louder. Inside, the young Marines sat silent, the weight of legend settling on their shoulders. The corporal stared at his untouched beer, whispering Grim Reaper. And behind the bar, Eddie muttered a prayer he hadn't used since Iraq. The storm came ashore in slow fists, pushing sheets of rain across Highway 76 and driving the ocean smell deeper into O'Malley's. Eddie turned the TV down until the announcer's voice was a whisper under glass. The young Marines stayed where they were, hands folded like school kids who'd finally learned there was a test nobody warned them about. Jack Carter sat with his palm resting on his empty glass the way a man settles a headstone before he walks away. Headlights swung across the front windows and held there too level, too steady to be a pickup. Eddie felt it first, the small rise of hair at the nape that says someone outside already knows your name. Company, he murmured. 3 black SUVs eased to the curb with the sound of wet tires and restraint. Doors opened in perfect time. Men in dark suits stepped out, carrying nothing visible and everything implied. No badges, no patches. Not law, not military, just authority that travels without an introduction. The corporal swallowed. Sir? Jack didn't answer. He shifted his chair a few inches so he faced the door straight on. It was a small adjustment, precise as a sight picture. The bell over the door didn't dare ring when it opened. A tall, expressionless man entered first crew cut, grown out, rain beading and running from the shoulders of an overcoat that cost more than the jukebox. Behind him, 2 others took positions along the wall as if they'd measured it earlier. Evening, Eddie said, because a man owns his bar by acting like he does. The tall man's eyes moved once across the room and settled on Jack. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't need to. Mr. Carter, he said. United States Marine Corps, call sign Grim Reaper. No one breathed. You've broken operational silence, the man continued, voice calm and edged. Command requires your cooperation. Eddie's towel paused over nothing. He's having a drink. This will be brief. Jack's mouth quirked without warmth. That what you told my team before Sand Halo? The man's eyes didn't change. We're not here to discuss history. That's all I've got, Jack said. History and a bar tab. The lead suit stepped closer, shoes whispering against old floorboards. Mr. Carter, you are to come with us. Quietly. Funny thing about quiet, Jack said. It's how you erased me the first time. A chair scraped. The scarred sergeant stood, shoulders squared. With respect, sir, this is a Marine Corps bar. The suit's gaze never left Jack. With respect, Sergeant, this is Federal. Federal has to eat somewhere, Eddie said evenly, and he pays cash. The door opened again, this time with purpose. Colonel Marcus Davis came in from the rain cap under his arm, jaw set like he'd been arguing with thunder. He took in the suits, the young Marines, Jack, and gave a short nod that managed to say, not here, and too late in the same breath. Colonel, the lead suit said, you were asked to stand down. I'm off duty, Davis replied. You don't have off duty. Davis ignored it. He addressed Jack. They're not here to escort you, Jack. They're here to erase the question. The suit's tone didn't shift. Colonel Davis no longer speaks for command. Command, Eddie said. Which one? The suit produced a thin folder from inside his coat edges, sealed the word classified, stamped like a bruise. He set it on the bar but kept a hand on it. Mr. Carter, failure to comply. Jack lifted a palm. You bring cuffs. We won't need them. Bring paperwork. The man tapped the folder. All the paper this requires. Jack glanced at Eddie. That's never true, he said softly. Something changed in the room, then nothing anyone could point to. Maybe it was the way the suits fanned a fraction wider, or the way the older sergeant's stance shifted into a triangle of bone and will. Maybe it was Jack's eyes tired, yes. Done, not yet. The corporal stepped forward, voice unsure but loud enough. Sir, with respect, he's a Marine. The lead suit looked at the kid like he was a stray word in a clean report. Not anymore. Jack saved the boy from whatever came next. He's right, he said. I'm not a Marine anymore. He turned his head to the corporal. I'm just a name they buried and forgot to mark the grave. The suit took that as consent and reached for the chair handles. Eddie's hand snapped out, catching the man's wrist with a speed no one expected from a bartender. The room tilted towards stupid. Easy, Jack said without raising his voice. Eddie let go. The suit wiped his wrist on the air and stepped back half a shoe. A new figure filled the doorway, rain-glossed dress blues under a dark hood. She pushed the hood back, water beading along a jawline toughened by years, and orders Captain Grace Carter, the kind of name you remember without trying. Her gaze dropped to Jack and faltered for a heartbeat. She masked it quick, but not quick enough for him. Didn't think I'd see you again, Jack said. Neither did I. Her voice was steady, lower than the storm, familiar enough to move a decade. The lead suit bristled. Captain, this is a federal action. It's a Marine action. The second you talk to him, she said, eyes never leaving Jack. To him, quieter. If you come now, I can keep you breathing. Protected, Jack said, tasting the word. In a room without windows. She didn't argue, which was its own admission. They escalated the moment your name hit a camera. Drones air traced the works. You don't get to be a rumor anymore. Eddie looked to the windows as if he could see beyond the rain. There just for a second a red pinprick through mist, then gone. The sergeant said sir and didn't finish the question. Backdoor, Jack said to Eddie. Always, Eddie answered, already moving. The lead suit raised a hand. His men shifted angles, sharpening. Mr. Carter stays. Grace turned eyes cold. Stand down. You don't outrank. I do, she snapped. And in that hard official second, everyone remembered chains of command can still bite. The suits paused, radio chatter crackling in one man's cuff, like an insect trapped under a glass. Jack reached into his jacket and laid a pair of battered dog tags on the bar. The metal clinked like a gavel. Men like you think I owe you my silence, he said to the suit. I don't owe you anything. I owe them. He nodded at the tags. And I've been paying for 20 years. The building hummed faintly, a sound like hornets behind a wall. Eddie's eyes climbed to the ceiling. Power surge. Grace's jaw set. Not power. She crossed to the shades and lifted a corner. Red light licked the glass and vanished. Drones, she said. They're painting the room. For a man in a wheelchair, Eddie muttered. For a name, Jack corrected. The storm punched the roof. The lights dipped, steadied, dipped again. Outside tires hissed. Doors thumped, more shadows patterning the windows in quick silhouettes. Grace moved to Jack's chair and gripped the handles. Tunnel, Jack said. Storage room. Maintenance runs under the alley. Left at the boiler. She blinked. You've used it. Once he said, when the jukebox caught the wall on fire back in '09. Eddie patched it. Haven't needed it since. Until now, Eddie said, already swinging the end of the bar up. Go. The suits reacted a half-beat late, the time it takes training to overrule surprise. Two reached for the door to cut them off. The scarred sergeant was faster. He stepped in front of the nearest suit and planted his boots like he'd grown there. He didn't raise a hand. He didn't have to. Men who've buried friends can still make a hallway feel too narrow to pass. Move, the suit ordered. No, the sergeant said, voice soft as gravel. Grace pushed. Jack's chair squeaked once, wheels tracking the grain of old wood. The corporal grabbed the storage door and shouldered it open, heart beating hard enough to taste. Cold, wet air rolled from the dark like a warning. The lead suit took a step after them, and Eddie slid the closed sign into his line of sight. You got a warrant for that tunnel? Eddie asked. The suit stared at the little red placard like it had insulted his lineage. This isn't a game. Neither is hospitality, Eddie said. In my place, folks leave the way I point. The suit flicked his eyes to the ceiling. Somewhere above, a tiny motor whined. The lights dipped hard enough to make bottles glitter. Then came the sound no bar should hear, the thin, insectile buzz of an optic finding home. Red fell across the floor, one narrow line that stopped on Jack's shoulder a breath before Grace yanked him through the doorway. The beam snapped to the jamb and burned a black kiss into old paint. Move, she barked. The last thing Jack saw before the door swung was the corporal face, pale but jaw set, stepping between a gun he couldn't see and a man he barely knew. Good kid, Jack thought, the kind the Corps deserved. Then the door shut, and the back hallway swallowed them in damp brick and echoes. Behind the bar, the lead suit cursed softly and reached for his radio. Eddie set a hand on his wrist again, not to stop him this time, but to remind him there was still a witness here who would remember names. In the tunnel, Grace's breath puffed in quick ghosts. Left at the boiler. Left, Jack said. His voice was calm, almost conversational. Then we see if the old hatch still opens. And if it doesn't, he smiled in the dark, then we make a new one. Above them, thunder rolled like a convoy. In the alley somewhere just beyond the brick rotors chopped low and mean. O'Malley's, the little bar that kept Marines loud and safe on Friday nights, held its breath. The Reaper was moving again. The tunnel breathed like an old lung, wet brick, cold air, the steady drip that keeps time for the forgotten. Grace pushed hard, boots slipping once on moss before she found the groove. Jack steadied his elbows on the armrests and kept his eyes on the black ahead. Left, he said, then the hatch. Their shadows jumped with each emergency bulb, dim coins screwed into rust-splotched cages. Somewhere above, rotors chopped the sky thin. The hum in the walls wasn't power now. It was pressure, too many eyes pressed against too small a space. You laid this out? Grace asked between breaths. Eddie did the digging. I did the remembering. Jack nodded to a junction where the tunnel forked. Barr put this in when the city tore up the alley for drainage. Some exits you build with permits. Some you build with favors. They veered left. The chair's bearings complained. Grace's forearms burned. You sure you can walk us through a maze you haven't used since 2009? Jack smiled in the half-dark. You don't forget the way out. Behind them, a door boomed, heavy, official, unembarrassed by locks. A man shouted federal, and the tunnel held the word like it wanted to spit. Grace didn't look back. 1 minute. Less, Jack said. They brought tools. The next bulb flickered, and there it was, a metal rectangle recessed into brick paint, peeled to the color of old anchors. A padlock hung from the latch, fat with age, stubborn by profession. Grace set the brake with her hip and pulled a pry bar from beneath the chair. It was army green once. Now it was just work. She sank the mouth into rust. Metal screamed. 2 tugs. The lock split with a grunt and fell to the floor, where it remembered gravity with a dull clang. Through, Jack said. She yanked. The hatch lifted an inch and stopped dead like a hand had caught it from the other side. Grace swore under her breath. Stuck. Jack leaned forward and pressed his palm flat against the seam, feeling for the lie of it, the place where force turns to leverage. Lift and roll. Not up. Toward you. She tried it his way, teeth bared. The hatch slid a stubborn centimeter, then another. Cold air rushed and cleaner salt touched night-wide. Hope smells like that to old Marines ocean and out. They were halfway through when the tunnel behind them filled with men. Freeze, a voice barked too loud for the narrow space. Grace turned, one hand still on the hatch, the other on the chair. 3 suits in the corridor, shoulders squared, expressions printed on by procurement. The lead man was the same one from the bar, reins slicked from shoulders to cuffs, a black pistol held low but ready. Behind him a 4th silhouette, Colonel Davis, face carved from regret. "Captain Carter," the suit said, voice even. "You've exceeded your authority." Grace didn't blink. "I'll write it up in the morning." "There won't be a morning if you keep moving that man." Jack's voice came gentle. "He's not wrong, Grace." He turned his chair to face them fully, wheels squeaking like old resolve. "I keep walking, they keep burying." The suit flicked a glance at Davis. "Colonel." Davis took 1 step forward, palms open. "Jack, stop. Let me get you in a room where I can talk for you." "We tried rooms," Jack said. "They just close." The suit raised the pistol to a textbook line. "Mr. Carter, you are recalled to service under Title 10 authorities. You will be detained for debriefing regarding the Reaper Initiative. Compliance may preserve your comfort." Jack looked down at his hand-scarred maps of choices nobody drew for him. Reaper was never an initiative, son. It was a ledger. He lifted his eyes. "You're carrying the wrong book." Grace's jaw set. "You're not putting around in a wheelchair." "I won't have to." The suit's gaze ticked to the ducting above them. Something invisible whined. Red dust fell from a grill like powdered brick. "Laser designators," Davis said quietly, sick, in a storm sewer. "Optics are optics," the suit replied. "And ghosts don't leave prints." The floor vibrated, small at first, then insistent, an approaching heartbeat. The corporal from the bar burst into view, breath shot to pieces, the scarred sergeant a step behind him, calm as an oath. So the corporal gasped at Grace. Back door was blocked, 2 more trucks. "Eddie sent us." He saw the pistol, the suits, the red dust floating in the light. "To shut up and listen." "Smart bartender," Davis murmured. The suit's patience thinned. "This is a federal operation. Enlisted personnel will—" The sergeant lifted a hand, not rude, just final. "With respect, I file my paperwork with Marines. Tonight this Marine," he nodded to Jack, "outranks your jurisdiction." "That's not how rank works," the suit said. "That's exactly how honor works," the sergeant answered. Above them, rotor wash slashed the air. The hatch rattled like a coin in a jar. Grace bent to Jack's ear. "We can push. We can make it to the alley." And then Jack asked, eyes on the suit. "More alleys." She didn't answer, because truth doesn't like to be repeated. The corporal wiped rain from his mouth with the back of his hand and looked at Jack like a kid asking a grandfather what courage is supposed to do. "Sir, what do you need?" Jack studied the boy, the sergeant, the colonel who had carried a uniform. Like a cross, the captain whose name matched his. Like a past life, the suit who had never been shot at and never needed to be. He exhaled a long, quiet thing that had been living in him for 2 decades. "I need a witness," he said. The suit lifted an eyebrow. "A what?" "A witness," Jack repeated. "Not a camera. Cameras are property. Witnesses are conscience." He turned his chair fully toward the suit, square-centered, parade still. "You tell your bosses this. The Reaper program didn't fail because we broke. It failed because we survived. We came home with more than scars. We came home with names." He tapped his chest. The tags under his shirt knocked each other, one soft metal against softer memory. "You buried the file. You forgot to bury the men." Enough, the suit snapped, and the pistol came up that fatal final inch. Colonel Davis stepped between them, back to the muzzle, face to Jack. The tunnel shrank to the width of his shoulders. "Don't," he told the suit without turning. "You pull that trigger, the bullet goes through a Marine and hits a war you can't win." For a long second, the tunnel held 3 kinds of breath. The held breath of men who expect impact, the steady breath of men who have chosen, and the shallow breath of men who mistake authority for courage. From the hatch night spoke faint at first, then clearer, a voice thrown along the bricks by the alley like a note in an empty church. Eddie above them calling down through the great street's clear west. I can stall the east for 30. You got one shot, make it. Grace didn't wait for permission. On me. She put both hands to the chair. The suit caught the motion and pivoted. The pistol tracked. The corporal moved without thinking, not in front of the gun, but into the line of sight hands, lifted eyes wide. Sir, he barked, too loud, too close, startling the suit a fraction. Fraction's enough. The sergeant's palm struck the slide with the economy of a craftsman. The muzzle dipped to concrete and belched a hot, stupid spark. The report in the tunnel was a gut punch. Everyone flinched. Grace shoved. Jack rolled. Go, Davis, roared voice, finally picking a side. He turned, caught the suit's wrist, and pinned it to brick like an ugly poster. Stand down. They were through the hatch into the alley's wet breath. Rain tattooed Jack's shoulders. Grace dragged the hatchback metal, shrieking like a wake. The corporal scrambled after them. The sergeant backed out, last eyes never leaving the suits. The hatch slammed. Bolts bit into seats that hadn't moved in years and remembered how. Behind the metal fists pounded a radio, shrieked a man, cursed with careful diction. Grace didn't hesitate. West. They ran, or in Jack's case flew tires, hissing boots, splashing, breath fogging. The alley spilled them onto a service road that ran behind the bar, past a laundry's lit windows and a diner's humming compressor. At the corner, Eddie stood under a yellow slicker, one hand on a breaker box, the other holding the fattest extension cord Jack had ever seen. Bought you 20 seconds, Eddie said. Maybe 30 if the city's asleep. You're a menace, Jack told him. I'm a bartender, Eddie said. Same job. Far down the block, the black SUVs were turning noses, hunting lights, carving the mist into knives. Grace pointed to a ramp where the curb dipped. Marine property 2 blocks. Old motor pool. No cameras since 98. Good year, Jack said, and let the chair eat distance. An engine revved close. A door slammed. Carter, someone shouted, the wrong Carter, the right one, didn't matter. Names were coming due. They cut across a lot slick with rainbows of oil. The chair jolted. Grace steadied him. Sirens, far off rotors, nearer thunder, doing its best to make everything feel like weather. The motor pool's wire fence loomed sagging, stubborn. A section near the corner was clipped and mended with faith and a prayer. Grace kicked the weakened diamond. It gave grudging. The corporal shoved it wider with a boot and a wince. Jack ducked his head and shot through. The chair's handles scraped. Sparks snapped. On the far side, the sergeant pulled the fence back with fists and will. Grace slipped under and yanked the gap closed just as headlights slashed the lot they'd crossed. They dropped behind a line of dead trucks, the kind that make their own weather of dust and nostalgia. The rain softened to a steady whisper on canvas tarps. For a moment, the world narrowed to breath and pulse. Grace knelt, resting one hand on Jack's shoulder, the other on the cold metal of a fender. The corporal crouched, chest heaving, eyes bright with the kind of fear that turns into something better if you let it. Davis slid in beside them, soaked to the bone, face set. You didn't hear it from me, he said, but there's a storm drain that opens into a culvert by the rail spur, 300 yards north. Always did know the exits, Jack said. Only because you taught me to find them, Davis answered. Engines idled on the far side of the fence. Voices carried the suits, angry now, afraid of losing the only thing they'd come to win. Grace squeezed Jack's shoulder. We can make the culvert. Jack looked past her at the hulks of trucks, the wet gleam of rails beyond the dark that wanted to keep him or carry him, he didn't know which. We can, he said. He reached inside his jacket and pulled the dog tags free. The metal was cold, familiar, overdue. He pressed them into the corporal's palm. "Sir," the kid whispered. "Witness," Jack said. "If I don't walk out, you tell it right." The corporal closed his fist around the weight. "Yes, sir." Jack set his jaw wheels aligned with the thin line of gravel that led to the rail spur. Somewhere behind the fence, a voice shouted orders into rain. Somewhere above, a drone leaned into its own reflection in a wet world. Grace stood. "On your 6, Reaper." Jack nodded once, acknowledging name past debt piece. Then he rolled into the dark that wasn't empty anymore, toward a place where roads turn into choices, and choices turn into the last thing a man owes himself. The recall had been served. Now came the reckoning. The rail spur cut through the night like a scar. Rain glimmered on steel and pooled in black mirrors between the sleepers. Grace guided Jack's chair across the gravel until the cover of a corrugated shed swallowed them whole. Davis and the 2 younger Marines slipped in after pulling the rusted door almost shut. For a long minute, nobody spoke. Breath steamed. Water dripped from helmets and hands. Then slowly, the weight of the past hour settled like sand. "You all right?" Grace asked. Jack looked at his palms. The skin was thin and calloused, webbed with old burns. "Define all right." She smiled faintly through exhaustion. "Alive. That's just a technicality." A low hum trembled through the air. They turned toward the far wall where a fuse box blinked weakly. Davis crossed to it and flipped the lever. Fluorescent lights coughed awake, showing a row of sheet-covered shapes. "Motor pool storage," Davis said. They mothballed the vehicles before the base downsized. No cameras, no power draw big enough to flag. Grace peeled back a tarp. Underneath sat an olive-drab Humvee, flat tires, sighing. Next to it, a crate stenciled with faded letters, "Reaper Equip, property of USMC." Jack stared at it until his throat worked. "Didn't think they'd keep the ghost boxed up." "Command keeps everything," Davis said. "Even the things it swears never happened." He pried the lid open. Inside lay relics, combat knives, night vision goggles, a field radio etched with sand. Grace lifted a folded flag from the top. The stitching had darkened with age. "They packed your whole life in here," she whispered. Jack reached out, fingertips brushing the fabric. "Not my life," he said softly. "My penance." Outside, engines growled. Headlights swept over the walls in thin slices. The younger Marine stiffened. "Patrols?" the corporal asked. "No," Davis said grimly. "They're sweeping for heat signatures. They'll grid this place in minutes." Grace crouched beside Jack. "We can still move north." "The culvert." Jack shook his head. "You'll just trade one storm for another. They don't want a man, Grace. They want a story buried." "Then we tell it," she said fiercely. "We go public. Records press." He gave a small, pained laugh. "And who listens to ghosts?" Silence again, broken only by the distant roll of thunder. Eddie's voice came suddenly from a radio Davis had forgotten he carried. "O'Malley's still standing, boys. You've got about 10 mics before they triangulate that signal. If you're gonna vanish, do it stylish." Davis thumbed the transmit. "Appreciate the drink, Eddie." "Tabs open forever," the bartender replied, and the line went dead. Jack exhaled slowly. He'll keep them talking. Long enough. For what Grace asked. To finish what they started. He nodded toward the crate. "Help me." Grace hesitated, but obeyed, lifting out a battered field transmitter. The casing was cracked, antenna bent, but when she toggled the switch, a small green diode blinked alive. "Still works," she said. Jack adjusted the frequency dial with careful fingers. The radio hissed, then settled into a steady pulse, an encrypted signal older than any of them. "This line's dead to the grid," he said. "Buried protocol. Reaper net." "Who's on the other end?" the corporal asked. Jack looked up, eyes glinting. "Whoever's left." He keyed the mic. "Reaper 1 to any ghost still breathing. You were never dismissed." For a moment there was nothing, just static thick as rain. Then faintly a reply, a single click, then another. "Morse." Grace frowned. "That's acknowledgement." "Yeah." Jack leaned back. Still a few of us haunting the world. Davis stared at him. You planning a resurrection, Jack? He smiled without teeth. Just a reminder, you can bury bodies, not promises. Outside, tires screeched. Flashlights cut across the yard. Voices calm rehearsed closing in. Grace gripped the sidearm at her thigh. We can fight. Jack shook his head. No more fighting. He nodded at the corporal. You remember what I told you. Be a witness. Good man. Jack's tone softened. Take that flag. Take her. Get out the north side when the lights flare. Grace's eyes widened. What about you? He looked at her the way soldiers look at dawn, like it's beautiful because it hurts. You can't save a ghost, Grace. You just carry his story. She opened her mouth to protest, but the first spotlight washed across the shed's open seam, bleaching everything to white. Davis slammed the switch on the fuse box. The lights died. Darkness rushed in thick and welcome. Go, Jack barked. Grace hesitated only a second, then grabbed the corporal's sleeve. They ducked through a side hatch just as the main doors burst inward. Boots thundered. Orders cracked. A flashlight beam found Davis standing alone beside the crate. Where is he? The lead suit demanded. Davis didn't answer. Behind him, the Humvee's ignition coughed once, twice, then roared a sound no one expected. The light swung, catching Jack in the driver's seat, hands tight on the wheel, the flag folded beside him. The Humvee lurched forward, metal screaming against rust. Jack Davis shouted. Tell them the Reaper kept his promise. Jack's voice cut through everything. Then the engine hit full throat gears, catching tires biting. The vehicle smashed through the side panel and vanished into the storm, a streak of headlights and thunder. Outside, agents scattered, shouting into radios. For a hot beat, the rain hid everything. Then a single flash lit the horizon, the flare of old fuel meeting open air. The sound rolled after it, low and final. Grace and the corporal, crouched behind a drainage ditch, saw the fire bloom and fade. Neither spoke. Davis found them minutes later, soaked, shaking, silent. He sank to his knees, breath ragged. He made sure they'd follow him, not you, he said. Grace's voice broke. He didn't have to. He always did. They sat in the rain until sirens dulled into the distance, and dawn began to gray the edges of the clouds. The next morning, the news called it a gas explosion at an abandoned depot. No names, no ranks, no history. Just another line in a world allergic to ghosts. At O'Malley's, Eddie unlocked the door, mopped the scorch marks off the back wall, and hung a new sign over the bar. Welcome home, Marines. First rounds for the Reaper. Grace and the corporal came by that evening. She handed Eddie a folded envelope. Inside was the dog tag cleaned of soot. On the back, etched in trembling letters, "We fought for peace, not applause." Eddie nodded once and hung it beside the flag that already watched over every stool. Weeks later, on a quiet pier near Camp Pendleton, Grace stood alone with a cup of coffee. The tide lapped slow against the pilings. She whispered, "You really think anyone will believe it?" A breeze moved the water, carrying her words out to sea. Somewhere far off, thunder rolled again, softer this time, almost like laughter. She smiled through tears. Semper Fi, Reaper. And for the first time in 20 years, the ghosts of Operation Sand Halo finally rested.